Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where, in my own language, it's all about discovering, mapping, and cross-pollinating the various building blocks towards a planetary civilization ahead. I want to start this podcast reminding us that ultimately we're all bound to deep time. And with deep time, I mean thinking about time less in decades or centuries, but in thousands and 10,000s of years. So the topic of today's podcast is community building to civilization design. And before I introduce the guest, I want to frame the conversation, because when we talk about community building and civilization design today in the circles of impact entrepreneurs, legacy family offices, we often forget that ultimately we have always lived as human beings, as the modern Homo sapiens, in tribes. I'm not saying it's about going back to tribes, but remembering that the saying goes, it needs a village to raise a child. And this is exactly how we have been living always, for millennia, up until maybe the last 150 years of, let's say, modern capitalism and the nucleus family, and for the less disenfranchised on this planet that are taken care of by a welfare state. And I think it's just important to move our heads to the heart space and ultimately have a soul conversation here, because I truly feel when we talk about civilization design and community building, it's a lot about remembering. It's a lot about what we sense and feel in our bones is the right way to relate beyond hardcore individualism. It's not that I'm ditching individualism, but we are all nested in infinite ways, all the way up and all the way down. And some of these fabrics are social structures and communities, whatever community you dared to manifest for yourself. So having said all of that as a preface, I'm super grateful to be in this virtual room together in between the east side of the United States and Guatemala, where I have full-time residency, where Love and Life invited me to settle down to speak with Maruxa Murphy. I would describe her as an alchemist, as an artist, as a community builder, as a weaver, as a strategist, as an entrepreneur, as a mother, and her discovering more the witchy elements of her embarking into this new life phase. So having said all of that, like always in my podcast, before we dive deeper into the topic, Maruxa, I'm super curious to have you explore with our listeners what are the pivotal moments that connect you with the topic of today's podcast, community building and civilization design, and try to take some of these peak moments. Sometimes they're in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, or maybe even just very recent. But this is, the juicy part that lets the listeners connect to you. The floor is yours. Super happy to listen in.
Alistair, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to know that this conversation was going to be happening between the two of us. I've been looking forward to it because in having had the opportunity to get to know you over the many months prior to this, it's felt like I've met my soul brother in the world of interweaving and expanding possibilities of planetary civilization. And the truth is, really, this work was started when I was a child. I am a, I would, I know I don't look it, but I am a Filipina American. And what that means is, when I say I don't look it, my mother is Filipino, Chinese, Jamaican, Puerto Rican, a quarter each. My father's from Spain. They grew up separately in the Philippines, met, fell in love, and I'm one of their four incredible children, if I must say so myself. But what that often has meant for me, being that I didn't ever feel like I belonged in the Filipino community because I didn't fit the part, I didn't look the part. I grew up navigating spaces between cultures and identities and expectations, really in a way that I was always in translation. Where do I belong? How do I belong? How do I help other people belong? Community to me wasn't just a concept. Honestly, why I created spaces of belonging in my own body of work was because I quite honestly recognized it was my way to survive. I had to learn how to find belongingness within myself and ultimately then belongingness with others. And how do we cultivate that in a way that feels like I'm creating family no matter where I go and with whomever I'm with. And so community is synonymous to me to a family experience, a family dynamic. And we get to figure out what kind of family we get to choose and the kinds of communities in which we get to play in, right? But community and this concept of understanding the world of community truly was a survival mechanism for me. It was a way for me to feel seen in the in between, and in the I've never been put in a box, so I get to create my own box or my own home. And so, even as a young person, I became a connector. I was the one who was hosting gatherings. I was the one who was seeing people, even as a 5-year-old little girl, and calling them into all of who they were. Didn't even have language for what I was doing, but that's really where it started. And, there was a moment though when I started to realize, at this point in my career, Alistair, I have built over 250 communities. Those communities have ranged from a few thousand people to over 1 million people large. Some are hybrid communities, meaning they're in person and have a virtual component. Some are in person and others are completely virtual. And but there was a turning point for me when I started to build one particular community, and this was in 2014. This community was called the Austin Moms Network. And at that point, it was myself, my friend Sarah, and a woman that we met at a playground who had a child on her hip and a child in a baby carrier on her front. And she said to us, "You guys look really nice. Can we become friends?" It was in that moment that I realized that it takes a village to raise moms, to raise us as mothers. And it was when I saw that initial vision that I felt so compelled by her experience and my experience of finding my chosen family, my chosen community that would help raise me as a mom in my own journey. That we ultimately, those convictions helped build what is now a 30,000 plus member community that has strategic partnerships with grocery stores and nonprofits throughout the city to help those most vulnerable in the city of Austin. It has also been deemed as one of the top communities for new families to join, uh, to really get engaged into the community of Austin. And it grew completely organically. And I realized in that moment that community isn't just something you grow, it's actually something that must be stewarded with care.
Then let me
It's
let me tie into that because I
oftentimes.
think,
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's two very interesting features. One is that being this outlier child and needing to make
Mhm.
sense of the world. And the other one is, okay, you're a mom, it's America, you're in Austin, that shit gets complicated. So isn't it interesting? And I reckon to most of us, as let's say modern civilized, I reckon to most of the listeners, how alien community feels and how much we dare to belong
Mm.
and how little of that seems to be provided just organically, naturally as our lives unfold as individuals. So, um,
Yeah.
maybe a last pivotal moment, because what I started to sense was the mom, the child and the mom.
Mm.
Is there a more
Mm.
recent
Mhm.
part, since you built so many communities, hybrid, offline, online,
Yeah.
um, that comes to
Yeah.
mind?
Well, I think there's a couple other things. Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. So, I think so. One community I'm currently building right now is the community that I call the Revolutionary Network. And these are all for those of us who are the rebels with a cause, the innovators, those who zig when everyone else zags, you know, and and ultimately this community was screaming. It's almost like it was like screaming out to me, hey, we need to be created because we're the movement holders. We're the people that are holding the movements and the innovation in movement making. And what would it look like to have space where we can just be, right? I remember, so that community recently has been screaming to me over the last 3 years, and it's now in its third year of being cultivated and growing. And the way in which this particular community has led me as a leader to continue to lead community has been really profound. We're in this really fascinating time right now, Alistair, where the models that many of us were positioned around, or especially the online communities were being positioned around, was you're the expert of all the things, and therefore you are on the mountaintop with your holy Bible scrolls and you're sharing with the world. Here is all the knowledge that you're meant to bring. And this community says, oh, no, 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 no. Well, yes, those are the models we've had. But the ultimate thing is that we're really shifting together, is that all of us are in a co creation with each of our areas of genius, with each of our areas of spark that is shifting us beyond anything we understand. So even in my own body of work around community work, I am being invited into that to the recognition again. I mean, this is such a recognition that I hope all of us have on a regular basis, but recognition again that I don't have all the answers. In fact, the answers are coming because we are together, because we are so much greater than me. And ultimately that is where we can land in this new world, in this new opportunity for us to be able to expand together. I remember in 21, Facebook came to me to consider becoming head of community. And I actually turned it down. Uh, to the surprise of quite a few people. We had been doing some work back in 2016 together. They were seeing how engaged many of the communities on the platform were. And they were like, how are you doing this? And over these years, we had built a relationship. And I just said, when I turned them down, I was really turning them down because I recognized that my soul's work was about building regenerative futures. It wasn't about reinforcing platforms built for extraction anymore. And ultimately, it was a really profound time for me in 21 to say, well, what am I here for? What are we actually doing? And at that point, that was my pivotal moment in my career, of saying, I'm only here. I'm actually here. I'm not only here, but a big part of my purpose is here to continue to build regenerative futures through this body of work that I've been cultivating over 26 years, um, to build a more regenerative world, to bring humanity back to the human race. And that to me has just been where the fun just gets to get started. That's where we're now getting started. So I feel like the pandemic gave me that gift, the pain of the pandemic gave me this profound gift of saying, hey, no, no, we're not here to just tactically build community anymore. We're here to actually start to embody community through our leadership, through
Amazing,
the ways in
amazing,
which we gather together, through
amazing.
the way in
I
which we are aligned. Hmm.
I have the feeling it's always like in an elevator in this virtual room together, like just
Mm.
uh, you know diving one layer deeper. So I find it very interesting speaking with a woman that has turned down an offer, that would be put on the billboards for almost everybody in, let's say, mainstream culture, right? You get offered a big bang or at least a solid bang for the buck, to offer your magic
Mm.
for hosting communities on a deeply extractive platform. Like all of Meta, I won't dive into that rabbit hole. As we
Hmm.
know, everybody, I recommend, if you have not seen it, The Social Dilemma,
Hmm.
please watch it. Right? What are the underlying functions and the repercussions, the second and third order fact of how modern social platforms built on extracting are basically eroding the very fabric of what we call democracy. That's at least my take and my
Right.
short parenthesis on the rabbit hole. So I'm curious to make it more like, let's put some meat on the bones. Can we start with one or two examples,
Mm-hmm.
either in the past or present, where despite your efforts, your genius, and trying to be the best, some things have not quite panned out? It could be examples from hybrid communities,
Mm-hmm.
offline or online. Let's start a little bit more with the bumpy parts, because we all learn through
Mm-hmm.
failure, and you're doing that for 26 years. You built hundreds of
Yeah.
communities. What's an example that comes to mind, or two different ones, to
Mm-hmm.
try to discern the patterns, like disentangling the whole phenomenon of community
Yes.
building?
Yes. Ah, this is so good. Such a good question. And I'm really glad you are asking because right now, there was a community. I'm not going to say names because it's somebody that we're, you know, in the process of working with. Um, but one of the things that came through deeply as we started to decide whether or not we were going to be working with this client was the recognition that I immediately, when I saw this particular client come through and they were pitching themselves, hey, you should work with us. We need to work together, you know. I immediately was like, they're gonna fail. They're gonna fail. And the reason I say that is because, again, yes, because of what I've experienced in the past and in terms of building communities. I'll give you a more like a recent example and then share with you how that's shown up. So oftentimes I'll have somebody come to me and they'll say, Marusha, I have this vision for community. I really want to build a community on XYZ. And in this particular case, it's in the world of sustainability. They have an incredible product that they're selling on their website. They see this product is going to transform the entire space that they're in. And they came to me and they said, let's build community. But really, what I also want is just your strategic connections to be able um, build build our community with them. And I immediately was like, okay, well, we're missing quite a few steps here, right? So this is a particular product that is based out of, and they want to get into the North American uh, ecosystem world, right? Um, so why I immediately saw that there was opportunity for failure here was one, the way in which they're currently messaging is absolutely, it's not conducive to what North American, the folks here in North America would be interested in. It's a whole new concept. It's a whole new way of creating sustainability that hasn't yet been proven per se in a way that's been able to that most North Americans have experienced. We don't have any early adopters here, right, in the United States at this point. Now, the product, is it absolutely incredible? 100% yes, right? But we just don't have that adoption yet. So while they want to have a community in essence of strategic partners to help build their platform, we actually have to take a few steps back. We actually have to look and say, okay, well, what is needed to be in place so that you are successful coming into this new market, this new space? So as we began to really look at what they were doing, they were like, well, we don't have any platforms to actually build community at all. We just wanted to get in front of other people's audiences. So I think that was one of the biggest things that we are seeing right now in the shift of community, in the world of community, is that a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations that want to do good are really mixing community versus audience with one another. Huge, huge. And we need both, by the way. But audience, if we break that down, audience is where we are basically doing a one directional conversation on platforms like podcasts, speaking, books, social media, right? Where we're sharing and inviting people to create an awareness, an aha moment to a concept or an idea that maybe they haven't fully understood yet. So in that case, right, we need audience members. We need people to to help us cultivate awareness, that education piece. But if we confuse that with community and what we're doing in the world of community, then that's the first big mistake that most of us are making right now in terms of wanting to build community. A community in the most basic form and sense, Alistair, is a group of people gathering together around a specific interest or topic. Now, in that, I want to see well more than that, right? I want to see that we have an intention, we have uh, sacred guidelines that we go by, that we have ways in which we want to deepen together more intentionally as a community. But the ultimate goal is that it's a community. A community is a group of people that gather together around a specific interest or a topic with an intention for an outcome of some sort, whether it's education, whether it's a transformation, whether it's living together and coexisting, whatever it is, that's the frame. And in that, the conversation is multi-directional, right? So a community can exist when there are at least two people, but when there's three, then it's a party, a small party, but a party nonetheless. And there's multiple conversations that can be happening at the exact same time around the topic of choice that we are gathering for. So when I see organizations that are wanting to cultivate community within their organization, we have to understand what is their number one, what is the core concept in which community is existing? What is their definition of community? Because if it's more of an audience building approach, then okay, that's helpful to understand. If they recognize that community is more in the frame that I just mentioned earlier, then even better, right? But we have to also then know, do they even have an audience to start gathering people from into that world of community? It's hard to build community if you don't have audience, right? And it's hard to build audience if you haven't built that know, like, and trust within a group of people that are wanting to have those light bulbs to come on and then grow from there. So to me, that I've seen it more often than not, that we have community people who they want the outcome of community, where people are deepening with their product line or their concept or their area of transformation, but they're not yet willing to do the deep work it takes to build a sustainable community that outlasts their lifetime, if not multiple lifetimes, you know? So I
Then,
think that's one huge area. And then the other, there's another one too we can dive into afterwards. Yes, go for it.
yeah, I think what I find very interesting, speaking about, let's say, community at large, I would say in my circles, um, I would say the more intentional circles, plant medicine circles, co-working circles, community living circles, understand truly community as what I would call like an intentional community. I like that you started explaining that also a body of your work is communities that have a more transactional element when it comes for brands, considering to build a community. And the funny thing is also some of the most mainstream brands on the planet were very successful doing so and very smart doing so early on. Like Nike running clubs, just one example, or Red Bull, absolutely
Right.
genius,
Right.
So I wonder if you can pick another example, let's say that's less product focused and would rather fall into the bucket of impact entrepreneurs, change makers, co-living communities, and again start with maybe some of
Mhm.
the patterns that you sense why from a first principles perspectives,
Yes.
understanding a lot of those communities with very well intentions ultimately don't succeed. It's almost like startups, I've been witnessing, I wouldn't
Yeah.
say 100, but at least 50 communities. How many of them have succeeded and sustained themselves for more than 3 years or 5 years, including the ones that I set up? Very few. So it's funny, when we say like 90% of all startups fail, I reckon 90% of all community endeavors, community building endeavors fail. So I wonder, from your rich background again, can you pull some patterns?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for that. You're absolutely right. So a lot of people that come to me that because they see the results I've made, you know, we help create additional revenue streams, the 6, 7, 8 figures of revenue, blah, blah, blah. They come in with that. I want that. Right. And then therefore it's easy to move into a space of transactional community conversation. And I think I appreciate, thank you for recognizing that the transactional nature of them in terms of a product based, because the truth of the matter is, um, it actually happens the same in communities that are even more that are aligned into either services or into wanting to create something that has more impact, but we don't often see it as easily, because what often happens in those communities is that we are still trying to figure out, um, how do we get our point across in a way that happens the fastest. But the truth is that communities that actually thrive, it's not about the technology that we're running it on, right? I've built communities on Facebook, on Circle, and Mighty Networks. We've even built them just on simple email lists and gatherings. It's really ultimately rooted in the essence of the community. It's not about the algorithms, right? So when we're building community, and I'm looking at communities that have created more sustainability, because that is the other thing. It's like, how do you build a sustainable community, one that goes well beyond ourselves? Most of the communities, I'll even say, I would say probably about 70% of the communities that we have built, especially in the early years before I recognized this piece I'm about to tell you, uh, failed. They flopped because it wasn't rooted in their essence. It was rooted in all the tactical, all the strategy to get to where we're wanting to go. So when we're even at the point of like, we want to create impact, but to do that we have to do, yeah, it has to look like this, or it has to feel like this, or I saw so and so's community and they're using these tactics. It's not going to work, because at the end of the day, the essence of the community is built on the vision, on the values, and the voice of the visionaries that are building the community. And I think it's a really, really important thing to pay attention to, that when we look at building communities from vision and values and voice, what that actually invites us into is accountability. It invites us into slowness, and it invites us into presence.
Let's
And I
dive deeper
think,
there.
and
Let's dive
and, and
deeper
what that
there.
means is it okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
visions, value, voice. I think, in as much as startups, let's stay a little bit on that frequency consciously. In most communities, I've seen what I would call the founder's dilemma. Doesn't matter if you pick, for example, the big ones, Fintorn, if you take Auroville, like the really big intentional communities, but also when you see online communities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there comes a moment, much like in an organization, meaning a company, where it's
Mm-hmm.
important to find a way of, let's maybe use transmission, to transmit the vision, the values, and the voice, so that
Mm-hmm.
these core elements, these core building blocks, can ripple within the community, so that you have other people that
Mm-hmm.
hold the space, are able to facilitate, create the vision forward in a different life phase or after the founder has died. Because what
Right.
often happens in spiritual communities, certainly
Yeah.
in co-living, co-working communities, is when the central figure
Mm-hmm.
suddenly leaves, it leaves a huge void. So, have you seen,
Mm-hmm.
let's jump to the successful examples. Have you seen examples that you have been, let's say, co-architecting, co-facilitating, where this has been achieved. And if it has been achieved,
Mm-hmm.
what was the magic sauce, being able to transmit this source energy to more people to create leadership and, let's say, solve that founder's dilemma?
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful question. This is the probably the best question that we can answer for all of us, because those I'm sure who are listening here, and you for sure, and for me as well, we we have convictions that oftentimes inspire the movement, right? And it's when we do often, and we've all been in that, I'm assuming all of us have seen, where we have a leader pass on or leave the community. What happens next? One of the things that and this was actually, the wisdom I gained from the first community I ever created, was it was a community for a college here in Orlando, the Orlando, Florida area, called Rollins College. I was 18 years old when I was invited to be a part of this budding community. I was in the first year of students that were able to be a part of it, and it was in essence a mentorship program for for first year students to be mentored by upperclassmen. Now, the college itself didn't have a lot of underrepresented voices and students on campus, and so I was invited to be one of those initial ones. So I get there, my first day on campus, I immediately see uh, 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 I saw things on campus, I experienced things on campus that truly just took my breath away, with the level of um, unwelcome, unwelcoming energy that was being positioned for students who were different on campus. And so I made the choice at that time, let's shift that. But one of the core models that we used in that moment, that I use now in pretty much every single community, whether it's a community, a small one that we just started at that point, the Austin Moms Network I mentioned, the million-person community in the relationships and the sexual revolution space that I helped create, or in any of the other communities, we use a model of mentorship, and we use a model of recognizing stewardship, right? It's powerful. So the way in which this works, it's actually a concept I have been terming, and will be writing more about it, which is called the new ROI, the new return on impact. The new ROI is the return on impact, right? And the idea here is that when we begin as leaders and as visionaries that hold this larger vision, this as a founder, right? We hold this vision for how we want to see the experience unfold. Our core responsibility, our core role becomes that we are an architect that imparts the larger vision into those who are ready to hear and take the reins and take ownership of taking that vision into reality. That is the number one role that we play. Yes, we need to raise money. Yes, we need to build relationships. Yes, yes, yes. Those are a piece of it. And it is imparting the vision in such a way that we are able to start to see the gifts that are already in our budding community, and how everybody then is able to play in to fit the role that they are either volunteering for or have been hired for, and do it to the best of their capabilities. If and when we get really good at that, then what we're doing is we're becoming the mentors to our initial leadership teams, and to any volunteers or others in the early adoption phase of the company we're building. And we then pass on the shared purpose, the shared vision, the shared values. We want to do that so that the shared purpose transcends any transactions. Transactions are integrated into the value system, the purpose that we're building. We want to make sure that we are stewarding a pathway for contribution. And the way in which we do that is by inviting those people in to say, how do you want to play into this bigger vision? So as much as we become the evangelists for that vision, the values that our company aligns in with, and the voice in which we're coming into the world with, right? Once we have that, you'll start to see that we become magnets for the exact right people, that are wanting to be aligning into that larger vision with us. From there, then as the team, we begin to we build out mentorship experiences where we're now inviting those leaders that are popping through. And those leaders obviously could be in our teams, but it also could be those early adopters that keep raising their hand or showing up for conversations, right? And inviting them to help us figure out what the next step is. Well, how do we, invite them to answer, uh, well, how do we make sure that what we've been building, the good of this community, continues on beyond any of us? They will let us know what rituals they want. They will help us define what those experiences are. And then from there, start to really envision and imagine that every single person, you as a founder, me as a founder, etc., us as leaders, everyone that we encounter are going to be our mirrors and our mentors. So when we see from those eyes, we see everyone in our lives as an elder, or a wisdom keeper for us, or someone that's going to be an edge walker for us. They're going to push us to the edge of our leadership, of our capabilities, to continue to learn and uncover those things that are going to continue to help us in our leadership grow and expand from the essence of love. So when we recognize that that's our role, that is actually the calling that we have on our lives. When we make that choice to be in these leadership roles, building these movement-based organizations, everything changes, right? We now start to have conversations from courage. We now start to have conversations with the recognition that together we are building sacred structures. And what happens on the outcome of that is that now these individuals have ownership. It's not about It's not about Maruxa anymore. It's not about Alistair anymore, or whoever the founder is. It's about us gathering together and growing. Now, maybe we were the spark for it, but somebody who has continued to practice from this way and build their, what I call the sacred rebellion, build their sacred rebellion from this way. What happens is that they are now empowering those beyond the visionary, but beyond them as the visionary, to take that mantle and run and to continue to grow and expand together. And when they are doing that regularly and as a part of their experience, it changes everything. I'll tell you a personal experience for myself. I was having a really, really hard time in my company a few years ago. I was in the middle of a divorce, and I was really struggling to see how I was going to continue to grow this company. My business partner was my ex-husband. And I told my team, I said, I think I'm done. I think we're going to close the doors. I don't see it. I don't see vision right now. And as founders, we do this, right? This is like a normal part of our lives. We go through these valleys. This was me in my valley, and I'll never forget. My team member goes, and I'll excuse my French, but she goes, "Oh, the hell, you're going to stop doing this right now." Absolutely not. You will not stop this. You have gotten us here to this place to see where it's, and we see where it's been and all the lives that have been changed because of the work that we're doing. Why are we going to quit now? Because you're having a bad day? And then she used some expletives, and then it was like, no, you are not. I am not letting you step down. Right? That was one of the most profound experiences of my life, because I realized I had been doing the role that I played into building this community, and everybody else had such level of ownership of it as well, that they truly could not imagine what it would look like for us to just end. So
Amazing.
where it goes wrong is when we put so much pressure on ourselves as, yeah, yeah.
Amazing. So it seems not, I'm trying to segue into something different, but let's take the kernel or the essence of what I got is, for whatever karmic reason, for you working hard and giving it everything, understanding yourself as an entrepreneur, and through you mentioned 70% of failures, in that pivotal moment in your own biography, when you were held by those who took leadership in your own organization, you were able to transmit that sparkle from source, because ultimately in every organization there's a source. So you're the source of your organization as the founding entrepreneur, you were held. And I want to, more as a on a frequency level, use that into a segue of a theoretical framework that I very often employ, which is called a theory of change. So, and I want to preface that quite a bit. So, ultimately, I don't think the romantic version of decentralized rural upper middle class white communities will really make so much of a
Mm-hmm.
difference. Most people will live in megalopolis areas, certainly the emerging countries, certainly India, China, Southeast Asia, but also in North America, South America, Europe. So I think instead of overly romanticizing community living as portrayed through Netflix series and so forth, that we can all live in these beautiful communities in the moderate region of Costa Rica and all start opening up a retreat center, right? I think that's all nice and important and
Right.
beautiful and touching, but I think it's more about being able to transmit that communities and plural nested organizations with a foundational purpose, from your mom network in Austin to community gardening to joint elderly care. These are all communities. So I don't know if you explicitly ever wrote down like your theory of change or if you're working with that body of work. But
Mm-hmm.
what I want to ask you is, in that moment when you ditched the Facebook offering and had a deeper reckoning with yourself, actually, okay, I'm successful. Even some of the biggest companies on the planet want to hire me and pay me like a lot of money to build communities.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm here for something more radical, more foundational, first principles. I'm here to birth a new civilization, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
with all of that preface, why do you think building communities and architecting some of these important puzzle pieces towards a planetary civilization ahead are so important? So, bottom line, what's your theory of change? Why are you standing there? And yeah, why do you give it so much effort?
That's such a good question. I think that at the core, we as human beings desire belonging. We desire to feel safe, what I call the sacred four, to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel honored and respected for who we are. And if that is the core of us, well, that's also the core, by the way, of community. Those are the sacred four elements that when we bring that into community, we actually are thriving. The studies have been showing that uh, a person in community based living, and not saying Costa Rican, regenerative uh, village, that would be wonderful. And also it could be in a massive city like New York City, right? But people who are living in community where they feel safe, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel honored and respected for who they are, actually live longer lives and have lower instances of heart disease, um, loneliness, depression, anxiety. They're all interconnected, right? Fascinating. It's a fascinating phenomena. But that's how we're built. So for me, I imagine, what would it look like to get to that place of my theory of change is that we need more community. Now, there's different types of community. I think we need to really start to distinguish what that looks like, right? We hear a lot right now about centralized and decentralized systems and community experiences. And for most of us, we probably see that the centralized systems are failing us right now in our world, right? Centralized communities are the ones that oftentimes are like here in the United States, our government we're a centralized system with a government that tells us exactly what to do, what not to do, etc. Right? Decentralization right now, and what I'm loving about the idea of decentralization in community is that it's creating opportunity for freedom, sovereignty. It's creating opportunity for free thought, for the ability for us to start to think beyond our just the way it always has been. This is just how it is. This is what. So when we begin to think through the world of community, when I say, that we need these sacred four, what is the format in which community can exist that allows us to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel heard, and feel honored and respected? Because when you look at decentralization, it truly does mimic, to me it mimics the mycelial network of the earth. you know it's distributed, it's adaptive, it's intelligent, it allows for experimentation, and it allows us to fail fast, and it allows us to reweave. That is that is my theory. In essence, that is my way. I believe that we are going to be able to have planetary civilization, is to invite people to be fully aligned with the being that they are, and then in understanding and healing all of the other stuff, the trauma, et cetera, and working through that to getting to a higher frequency, higher vibration of love, while we're doing that together in community and everyone's committed to that. That's where the magic really starts to show up. So I truly, I imagine this world where communities are going to be self-sustaining, and at the same time they're going to be interlinked. Because if we start to, this is going to be, I hope this makes sense, and please just stop me and ask for clarification, but I truly believe that we're moving into a world where the culture, where Gen Z, Gen Y are going to be the ones inviting all of us into a way of being that is much more highly conscious. I'm so excited. I have three daughters, one in Gen Z, two in Gen Y, and I'm just absolutely um, I'm sorry, Gen Alpha. I'm absolutely engaged in the conversations that they're having, because ultimately right now they're telling me, Mom, all this world that you are so used to talking about, it doesn't have any, it does not, I have no value, there's no value in this conversation about hierarchies and such. They see each other as individuals and as equals, and in that they're creating new paradigms and new ways of seeing the world from a lens that I did not have as an almost 45-year-old woman growing up in the Philippines and the United States, right? So I truly see that right now we're moving into this place where our culture is going to demand that we're coming into this place of uh, micro community experiences, while at the same time learning self sustainment for each of them as individuals and within those micro communities. And that through our shared values, shared currencies, shared rituals, we'll start to see the interlinked communities that have those similar values, similar rituals, similar currencies, wanting to interact in specific ways, and then going off and doing their own thing as well, separately, right? And then I start to see that governance is going to be much more localized, but that it's going to be localized, but it's also going to be based on shared values, shared vision, but and ultimately into a place where those those localized governments are going to then choose to play in their own unique ways with one another.
I want
So it's
I
almost like
want
we're having this like major like reset of our planet and our nervous system as a planet at this
no,
time.
definitely. I mean, we're on a, the way that I sense it from all wisdom traditions, monastic traditions, indigenous traditions, we are on the cusp of either destroying the mother organism or to become shepherds, right, as the dominant species. And I think it's our joint dharmic responsibility of this generation, at least those who dare to endure all the difficulties to try something completely new and unheard of. Before we segue into governance models and funding mechanisms, I want to again use a framework. It's called spiral dynamics. I don't know how profound you are with spiral dynamics. Basically, the underlying first principle structure of spiral dynamics is that we as individuals, as human beings, develop our consciousness around a certain spiral movement. And I will quickly sketch that and ask you then some very specific questions. So basically, when you're born as a child, you're very egoistic in a healthy sense, because the only thing you want is you want your needs to be met by your mom, right? Especially in the first, let's say, at least 2 years, right? You're very egoistic. You want to sleep, you want to play, and you're hungry, like kind of like basic. But then
Right.
roundabout when
Right.
when you enter kindergarten, there's a new need and a new complexity of structure in your consciousness arising, which is belonging, tribal. So like, these are my friends and these are not my friends, right? And a little bit later, ideally organically, you understand there are some overarching structures that your parents told you, but kind of they make sense, whatever. You go to the loo, you don't do it at the table, right? Is you don't talk about everything in a certain environment, right? Because your parents told you this is what we speak at home, but please don't mention that in school. You may enter into serious trouble. And then at a later stage, which is a very formal logic
Right.
operational, you learn how to argue, how to strategize, how to imagine your future. And these can be all color coded, right? So I think before diving into the leap in consciousness that in the model of spiral dynamics is referred to as second tier consciousness, where the assumption is you have an organic connection inside of yourself to all different layers. Something very tribalistic, meaning if now somebody were to enter this house and trying to kill my wife, I would not continue to do, the podcast. I would take a knife and fucking kill that bastard, which is like super, just like, okay, no, this is like
Right.
my
Of
tribe, this is
course.
my family. But I can also access a layer of consciousness where I'm saying, well, maybe I shall better call the police, like a rational, mind setting. So, having said all of that, there's an article which dates back quite a while, which coins the green meme and the mean green meme. Mean in the sense of they're not really aware of what they're doing. And I want to paraphrase that. So I'm a community born
Ah.
child, and I tried to get a couple of intentional communities off the ground. They failed up until I became aware that I was ditching certain parts of myself and of my own, let's say, way that I did grow up. I don't have like any entrepreneur in my whole family. They were all employed by the state over generations, and all have been employed. And segueing into the question is, I have the feeling there's a certain mastery on every level of the spiral. And one of the levels that I think that I'm aiming to master at the current stage in my life is, how can you hack the system you're born in, right? Because a lot of the intentional communities, once they have, for example, a piece of land, or they want to run a retreat center or an organic farm, they become painfully aware that often in these communities, there are no successful entrepreneur examples. Because ultimately, just quote unquote to run a retreat center or just to successfully do community gardening, that's a very complex entrepreneurial endeavor, where those community who had a strong founder or a founder couple or a woman, meaning like both sexes, that were able to transcend a certain life phase and go into building their legacy beyond an entrepreneurial endeavor, quite some of them, at least I've seen successfully been handed over to, let's say, the generations before the founder. So I don't know, in as much you're familiar with the concept of spiral dynamics, but maybe in between the lines, I think there are often very romantic assumptions, as if I, as an individual, being overwhelmed by my personal life and not being able to figure that out, and that's why I'm searching community, and then me living in community would solve the puzzle. And I think that's really a big issue, especially
Ah,
when it comes to impact entrepreneurial communities, and even more so when it comes to intentional communities that want to live together. Anyhow, it was a long preface. Let's dive into
that's
it.
right.
Curious to sense from your side.
Oh, I love that you're diving in. I know I spiral dynamics, I appreciate this question, has been something uh I've been understanding for a little bit as well. So I follow what it means to be green, for example, right? Um, and I think you're 100% correct. So there's two things to pay attention to here. One is the fact that you have the founders who have this true, like from the core of their being, they have such a well-intentioned reason for why they want to create an intentional community. Yeah? And in that, if they're in that place of being in that green in green, then they're going to be building oftentimes community that feels inclusive, but there's no structure, right? Or they'll build community that is open to all the people, but without integration of really their own stuff, their own shadows, their own inner work that they need to do. And we need to really begin to look at those shadows to be able to move into this more of the second tier within it. Yeah. Then you also have those individuals, to your point earlier, that who are interested in being in community because they know that this community is going to serve them. I saw this oftentimes in church. I mean, I grew up in the church, so part of my first understandings of community were part of being in the church world, the Roman Catholic Church in particular, then moving into more of a non-denominational Christian church experience. And I remember being like, I just need, I just needed to get out of this feeling alone. So I'm going to join this community. But again, when coming from that place of green, it's blind trust, right? It's blind. It's like I'm addicted. It's almost like this. There's an addiction to being illuminated, but we're allergic to being truly well. And when we're in that space of green, what often happens is we're going to just lean in and be like, yes, this is enough resonance for me, but I don't necessarily have. There's not a full understanding of how I can show up or how I can contribute in because I'm just now part of this crew, right? There's no ownership of that. And so it's something that I pay attention to when I'm working with community is where's the founder, where's the visionary, where's the person wanting to instigate the community, where are they coming from, what is their motivation, and where are they in this process of wanting to build the community. I see this a lot of times in very well intentioned groups to support. Let's say there's a community I'm in talks with right now, and we're having these types of conversations around. I want to help women who have never had the opportunity to start their own business, right? And then they're going to be partnering with organizations where the women are literally just trying to figure out their food and housing situation. They're not thinking about business, but the intent that there's a well intentionedness about them building a business where really all they want right now is to feel safe and secure and have home, have like a foundation, right? So we wanted to see where are our blind spots when we're in that space of green. And ultimately we begin to we want to where I want to invite us into when we're thinking about, moving beyond that and our own stucknesses, that's a wonderful word I just made up, I guess, in our areas of stuck in our stuck energy or the shadow areas of our lives, is to recognize that we're doing our own work, right? So we to get to that second tier, we need to really start learning how to integrate. So the goal doesn't the goal should never be, oh, I just need to ascend to that next level. I want to go to yellow. I want to go to turquoise. I want to go up there, right? If we're doing that, we're actually bypassing our own work. We're actually stopping ourselves from actually focusing on the integration that needs to happen, the healing that needs to happen to get to those levels where we're now being able to
I want,
metabolize that
I want
inner
to,
work
yeah,
somatically within our bodies.
I'm imagining, I want to jump on the word bypassing.
Mm.
And I think it's a tricky one. Let's pick myself as an example. So I was always very smart. Don't have children yet. So I was always optimizing for freedom. And I would say certainly in my 20s to early 30s, in hindsight, I think I was bypassing integrating those shadow elements that I was repressing mainly through living out all the freedom and enjoying life without truly needing an adulting process. So consciously using, not like adult as a final noun, but as a process. And since so many things failed in my life, which I think is a normal learning experience, I came to grips that ultimately, for what I want to build, which is a foundation on freedom, authenticity, and a certain like a radical attitude to carve my way as a soul into uncharted territory, is it that I need to master entrepreneurship. This was, I don't know, only I think around about 10 years ago. And then I'm like, okay, you're a trained macroeconomist. You trade your money for time, a freelance business model as a consultant, which is well paid. But in order to maximize that, you would basically need to have a lifestyle that's pretty much a consultant lifestyle. Meaning, sure, you can like pump up your burn rate, your like the rate you sell your time, but there comes a glass ceiling pretty early on unless you want to live like type McKinsey in like 60, 80-hour working weeks for decades and a super unhealthy lifestyle. So I told myself, okay, if I'm very honest, I don't need to know all of that, but I need to work with people who have a successful track record in having built and sold a couple of companies. And this very, very profoundly changed the way how I chose with whom to work with and be on a cap table with. Because it seems almost like in a jump and run game, I have done 20 years of personal development, therapy, intergenerational trauma healing, plant medicine, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, like tantra, like all of it. But currently I'm just like, wait. I know I can do it, but I want to do it with people that have done it, instead of, needing to go on another arduous 20-year journey, of knowing how the entrepreneurial game works. So, maybe that as to color code that. I grew up very anti-capitalista, very left-wing, very academic left-wing, ditching capitalism. And in as much as we need to and want to and aspire to rewrite the code of the system, we can't fully escape it, right? We're not born into feudalism. I won't touch on the book Techno-Feudalism, separate podcast with Yanis Varoufakis. But in order to be able to outgrow capitalism, unless you're born rich or you will inherit a ton of money, you need to hack capitalism. And the only way that I found to hack capitalism, and I have few idols out there who have done that successfully and do amazing philanthropic work, foundations, community work, they hack capitalism as an entrepreneur. So anyhow, and that would be, I needed to painfully understand that I had not fully reflected my own upbringing, including bypassed or tried to bypass the orange layer of spiral dynamics.
Yeah.
I know
Right.
I need to cut out hard, so we have somewhat 15 minutes left. No, 10. 10. We have 10
Ah.
minutes left. Let's skip
10.
funding and governance
Oh.
models. Let's go 5 minutes into the juicy why communities fail, because I have seen a couple of dozens fail, and I would say it's pretty much always for sex, money, and power, and then look into the crystal ball together. So why sex, money, and power? What are your
That's right.
experiences with that? Without mentioning names, but I think we need to be very careful how we talk about, how we frame, how
Yes.
we govern, and what are also the institutional governance mechanisms for penalties around issues with sex, money, and power that often in communities are bypassed. And this is why they fail. They don't have clear sanction
Yeah.
mechanisms in place.
Yeah.
Sex, money,
Yeah.
power. Curious to hear from your side.
Okay. We might have to have a part two just on this topic. And now it actually though connects to what I was going to add on as we think about spiral dynamics, right? And it really is that the truth is like I walk into so many spaces, my friend, where we're preaching equity, right? Everyone's equal. We're here for a greater cause, but they're practicing ego. And so what we have to recognize as we go into the conversation of, sex, money, power is that when we make the choice to be in leadership, I honestly see it as ministry in some ways. It's a lived frequency. It's an invitation to be at the fullest version of ourselves on a regular basis. And we only earn that if there's a way to earn that. And that's through grief, it's through grace, and it's honestly through the grounded truth of who we are as human beings. When we finally really get clear on that, we open up the pathway and the channels to being fully aligned in our beingness, and we can be honest with ourselves in that. That is what then allows us to not have the common pitfalls of sex, money, and power, right? It is the antidote. It is the medicine to this, because you're right. What often happens in communities, especially when you start to get some sort of acclaim, some fame, some power, is that leaders are not doing their inner work, right? There's unspoken trauma loops that are playing out in these community dynamics. We start to have this idea of freedom, being masquerade, which is a masquerade because of there's the lack of structure is masquerading as freedom. So what happens then is that then we go into these areas that ultimately are killing the essence of why the community was in existence in the first place. So as leaders, it becomes ultimately our calling to move ourselves into that place of recognizing our responsibility in making the choice to lead these movements that we're creating. So one of the things I think that's really, really important is that to recognize is that our shadows, the shadows that we avoid, truly become the saboteurs of our community. So it's not that sex, money, and power aren't the problem. It's how we pretend that they don't exist until it's too late. When we
Especially when we
recognize that this is a
prevent,
very possible thing for us.
yeah, especially when we prevent as
Yeah,
if they were not to exist, you know deeply in
exactly.
any environment,
Exactly.
in any work, romantic relationships, family, business relationship, friends, communities, whatever the social circle of the humans is, if you can't talk about sex, I'm not talking about kink, I'm just talking, how's your sex life? Or are you
Yeah,
repressing something? Or are you bypassing
exactly.
something? Or power, like I sense there's a hidden power structure in the room.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody wants to address it. Does it maybe have to do with the transition of family power within the family office, for example, because I work so much with entrepreneurs and family offices,
Yeah.
you know? So sex, money, power,
Yeah.
if they can't even be addressed, if everything is swept under the
Yeah.
carpet, no, 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 my life was easy as a child. Everything was
That's
easy.
right.
No, 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 I never had issues with my parents. Or no, 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 me and my partner, we never have issues.
Right.
Or no, 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 in our organization, we just trust things fall into place. We don't need structures. Like all of these very woo-woo answers to the hard
Right.
questions of sex, money, and power are clearly at least a
Right.
pointer into the direction that something is clearly,
That's it.
not sorted out.
That's it.
Let's do a twist. I've
Yeah.
never done that in a podcast. I want to do another recording. Let's see what constellation we want to do.
Mm.
Almost a part two, diving deeper in unpacking communities. And how do we curate that? I have the
Mm-hmm.
feeling it could be 3 or 4 people. I don't like more than four. Could be you
Okay.
plus two more, you plus one more. So from the sex, money, and power, because I want to leave the people with a Maruxa transmission. Let's skip the fucking horizon one. Yes, you want to be more successful, have more structure, have more distributed leadership in your team. Okay, let's cross that out. You will reach that. Let's also skip horizon two. Okay, in 5 years, you can be more careful about with whom to choose because you have more entrepreneurial
Yeah.
freedom and you really, level up the leadership that's distributed. All of that for me is
Yeah.
horizon one and two. Easy. We will know each other, in 5 years. Done. What's your horizon three? And
Love it.
there's two ways that I will allow you to answer that. The easier one is the 10-year vision. So you're celebrating your birthday. It's the year 2035 and you answer it from that cosmic address. Or you take your deathbed. Like you hand down the legacy. It's 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, maybe you cross
Mm-hmm.
100, and all these ripple effects, they had their magic. Maybe there's a first sproutling of a planetary civilization. So I'm curious, how do you answer the question for your own legacy, either from, let's say, a 10-year standpoint, or really when you leave this body and you pass the baton on to the next generation?
Oh, I love that question. I would say the first thing that comes very clearly through is that I have such a level of pride, almost like a grandmother who's passed on her wisdom from my mentors, like Mr. Rogers. I know we didn't even get into that, but Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is one of my personal mentors when I was the last 3 years of his life. And some of the others that have been mentoring me to be able to shape. I feel like I get to pass that baton, almost like that grandmother. I imagine that we have hybrid models of sacred capital where communities are interlinked in the decentralized model to amplify more good on the planet. I believe that we have a world where love and courage are at this and integrity are at the center of all conversation, and that we have this beautiful way where intergenerational leadership is coming back, where our children are actually teaching us. They're the wisdom keepers and aligning in to teaching us about what they're seeing when it comes to curiosity and playfulness and the innocence, while we are also bringing in the wisdom and the ancient traditions that are being passed on to us. And I imagine also that we have, we have to remember that we have tech. So we have into AI integrated consciousness tools at our disposal. So we ultimately are building schools, we're building currencies, we're building, in essence, the cathedrals of the future. They just don't necessarily look like what we have seen in the past. But what we are creating now is a place, a world where our children come with such levels of curiosity and play that peace is in the air, not because we fought for it, but ultimately because it's we've remembered that it's ours all along, and that we could actually live in this place. So that's what I imagine. That is my civilization, my planetary civilization vision over these next 10 years. I hope to see that definitely before the end of my life, because I see that 50 or so years from now. So that's what I aim for, and those are the kinds of projects I am here to help lead and steward on this planet.
Then, then let me reciprocate before we check out. I never heard the word cathedral in that context, but there's a really famous book with an unspeakable name, which is something with like the good ancestor, it's called. And he consciously uses the framework or the metaphor of the cathedral because it is truly intergenerational. These huge cathedrals have been built for hundreds of years, and it's very complementary. Really, it's very much on the same frequency. Is I have the feeling in the next 10 years we will see global decentralized cathedrals, both online only, offline only, as well as hybrid, where those with enough degrees of freedom can pray together, dance together, love together, heal together, support each other together, mentor each other together, and where true intergenerational bonds can happen that nurture that joint dream that I think is part of what you have been coining sacred. Like the sacred knowing
That's right.
that in our hearts it's possible to birth that new civilization, which I would call the planetary civilization with us
Absolutely.
as the shepherd species instead of, the apex predator
Mm-hmm.
species. Marusha, I've never announced that literally in no
Oh,
episode. We'll do a follow up. It was just, I'm just humbled. Literally, I'm just humbled by our encounter. We yet have to physically meet, but this doesn't change my affection and the curiosity and the gratitude. Thanks for the conversation today, Marusha, to be continued, and happy to hand over for a checkout for you. Thanks so much for this conversation.
mm. Thank you, Alistair. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for inviting in this conversation. I don't do very many podcasts, actually, at all, at this level of depth that we've gone into today, and it feels so juicy and perfect. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marusha, to be continued.